My name is Eugenia, and I am 37 years old. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon. An unfamiliar voice introduced himself as a lawyer representing my parents. Parents I had not spoken to in 22 years. Now, they were suing me for what to see their grandchild. Before I share how this phone call shattered my world, let me know where you are watching from, and hit subscribe so you do not miss how I confronted the people who abandoned me when I needed them most. I grew up in Prairie Hills, Minnesota, one of those picture-perfect small towns where everyone knows not just your name but your business too. My parents, Gerald and Martha, were pillars of the community. My father worked as the high school principal, and my mother was the church choir director. Our house was the white colonial with the perfect lawn and the American flag flying proudly by the door. From the outside, we were the definition of the perfect American family. But inside those walls, perfection came at a cost. My father ruled our home with strict discipline. Every grade less than an A warranted a lengthy lecture about disappointment and potential. Every Sunday, we sat in the front pew of church, dressed immaculately, smiling at all the right moments, while I felt like I was suffocating in my starched dresses and forced politeness. Eugenia, remember who you are and who you represent. My mother would whisper whenever I laughed too loudly in public or expressed an opinion that differed from theirs. I represented the Thompson family name, a responsibility that weighed heavily on my teenage shoulders. My only escape was my friendship with Sophie Martinez. Her family had moved to Prairie Hills when we were in 5th grade, and we bonded immediately. Where my home was rigid and cold, hers was warm and filled with laughter. Her parents hugged her freely and encouraged her to speak her mind. When I visited their home, I felt like I could breathe. "Your parents are so intense," Sophie would say, shaking her head after witnessing one of my father's lectures about my B+ in chemistry. "They just want what is best for me," I would reply, automatically, the words programmed into me since childhood. But even as I defended them, I knew something was not right. I watched other parents support their children through failures, celebrate small victories, and offer unconditional love. My parents offered approval that was always conditional, always just out of reach. In 10th grade, I met Jason Miller in my biology class. He had moved from Chicago and carried himself with a confidence I found magnetic. He did not care about fitting into the small-town hierarchy, and his outsider status made him even more attractive to me. When he asked me to be his lab partner, I felt a thrill I had never experienced before. Our friendship evolved naturally into something more. We would study together at the library, careful to maintain the appearance of academic dedication while stealing glances across the table. My parents focused on my perfect academic record, and future college applications approved of these study sessions, unaware that my heart raced every time Jason's hand brushed against mine. "Harvard has the best pre-law program," my father would say over dinner, plotting my future without my input. "Princeton is a solid backup. Nothing less than an Ivy League education will do for a Thompson." I would nod and agree, feeling the weight of their expectations crushing my own unformed dreams. I did not even know if I wanted to be a lawyer, but contradicting my father was never an option in our home. As my junior year progressed, my relationship with Jason deepened. He was the first person who seemed interested in my thoughts rather than my achievements. We shared dreams and fears under the bleachers after school in the brief moments of freedom before I had to return home to my carefully scheduled life. Our first kiss happened behind the gymnasium after a basketball game. It was awkward and sweet, and I felt alive in a way I never had before. This was something that belonged just to me, not to my parents or their grand plans. When Jason invited me to join him and a few friends for a weekend camping trip at Lake Wabasha, I knew my parents would never approve. For the first time in my life, I lied to them, claiming it was a school-sponsored science retreat with female chaperones. The elaborate lie required forged permission slips and Sophie's cooperation as my alibi, but the promise of freedom was worth the risk. That weekend was magical. Under stars brighter than I had ever seen, with a small campfire crackling and the gentle lapping of lake water as our soundtrack, Jason and I made love for the first time. It was not the perfect moment from movies or books. It was awkward, a little painful, and over quickly, but it was real, and it was mine. "I love you," he whispered afterward, and I believed him with the wholehearted trust of first love. We returned to our regular lives, but something had shifted. I felt different, like I had crossed an invisible line into a new version of myself. My parents noticed nothing too focused on my upcoming SAT preparations to see the change in me. 3 weeks later, on a cold January morning, I woke up feeling nauseated. I dismissed it as a stomach bug, but when the feeling persisted for days, a terrifying possibility began to take shape in my mind. I counted back the days on my calendar and realized my period was late. With shaking hands, I purchased a pregnancy test at a pharmacy in the next town, over too afraid of small-town gossip to buy one locally. In the school bathroom with Sophie standing guard outside the stall, I saw the 2 pink lines that would change everything. "Oh my God," Sophie whispered when I showed her the test, her face mirroring the shock and fear I felt. "What are you going to do?" I had no answer. At 17 years old, in the 11th grade, with parents who valued appearances above all else, I was pregnant and terrified of what was to come. For weeks, I carried my secret like a stone in my stomach, growing heavier each day. Morning sickness became my constant companion, and I became an expert at hiding my symptoms. I told my parents I was staying after school for extra credit projects, when really I was hunched over toilet bowls, retching quietly so no one would hear. I finally gathered the courage to tell Jason. We met at our spot behind the bleachers, and I blurted it out without preamble. "I am pregnant." His face went pale, then red, then settled into a mask of panic I will never forget. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice cracking. Maybe the test was wrong. But deep down, we both knew it was not wrong. Jason paced back and forth, running his hands through his hair. Finally, he stopped and pulled me into a hug. "We will figure this out," he promised. "I am not going to leave you dealing with this alone." His words comforted me, but I noticed he did not say what I desperately wanted to hear, that everything would be okay. I researched options on school computers, clearing the browser history afterward. Abortion, adoption, keeping the baby. Each path seemed impossible in its own way. I imagined my parents' reactions and felt physically ill. As weeks passed, Sophie became increasingly concerned. "You need to tell them, Eugenia," she insisted one afternoon as we sat in her bedroom. "You cannot hide it forever, and the longer you wait, the fewer options you will have." "They will kill me," I whispered, not entirely convinced it was an exaggeration. "They are your parents," Sophie said, squeezing my hand. "It will be hard, but they love you. They will help you figure this out." Her optimism came from having parents who showed their love unconditionally. She could not comprehend what I knew instinctively, that my pregnancy would be seen as an unforgivable stain on the Thompson family name. But Sophie was right about one thing: I could not hide it forever. Already my jeans were getting tighter, and I had started wearing baggier clothes to conceal the small changes in my body. I chose a Sunday evening to tell them after a church service where the pastor had spoken about forgiveness and family bonds. I hoped the sermon might have softened their hearts, preparing the ground for my confession. We had just finished dinner. My mother was collecting plates, and my father was discussing a school board meeting scheduled for the following week. My heart pounded so loudly I was certain they could hear it. "Mom, Dad," I interrupted, my voice barely audible. "I need to tell you something." They both looked at me, mild curiosity on their faces. My mother sat back down, folding her hands neatly on the tablecloth. The words stuck in my throat. I took a deep breath and forced them out. "I am pregnant." The silence that followed was deafening. My father's face transformed before my eyes, the mild expression replaced by a rage I had never witnessed before. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "What did you just say?" My father's voice was dangerously quiet. I could not repeat it. I sat frozen, watching as he processed the information. Then the storm broke. He slammed his fist on the table so hard that water glasses toppled over, spilling across the white tablecloth. "How could you do this to us?" he roared, standing up so quickly, his chair fell backward with a crash. "After everything we have done for you, all the opportunities we have given you." My mother began to sob, not the delicate tears I had seen at funerals or weddings, but ugly, racking sobs that shook her entire body. "Who is responsible for this?" my father demanded, looming over me. "That Miller boy, I will ruin him. I will make sure he never graduates, never gets into college." "It is not just his fault," I said, finding a small spark of courage. "It takes 2 people. The look he gave me was one of pure disgust. "I do not even recognize you." My daughter would never speak to me this way. My daughter would never bring this kind of shame to our family. My mother finally spoke through her tears. What will everyone think? The church, the school board, our friends. How can we show our faces? Their concerns were not for me, for the fear and confusion I was experiencing, or for the life growing inside me. Their concern was for appearances, for their reputation in the community. You have two options, my father said, his voice cold and final. You get rid of it or you get out of this house. Gerald, my mother gasped, but there was no real protest in her voice, just shock at hearing the ultimatum spoken aloud. I want to keep my baby, I said, surprised by the certainty I felt even in that terrible moment. Then you are no longer our daughter, he replied without hesitation. You have 24 hours to pack your things and leave. My mother did not contradict him. She would not meet my eyes, focusing instead on mopping up the spilled water with trembling hands. I sat there stunned by the swiftness with which my family had been ripped away from me. In the space of a few minutes, I had become an orphan. I called Jason from my bedroom that night, desperate for the support he had promised. The call went straight to voicemail. I texted him repeatedly explaining what had happened, begging him to respond. Nothing. The next morning, my father left for work without speaking to me. My mother moved around the kitchen like a ghost, avoiding eye contact as I tried to talk to her. Mom, please, I begged. Do not let him do this. I am your daughter. She finally looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed but resolute. You should have thought about that before you disgraced this family. Perhaps this will teach you about consequences. I packed my belongings in a daze, filling 2 suitcases with clothes and a few precious mementos. As I was about to leave, my mother handed me an envelope containing $300. This is all I can do, she whispered, glancing nervously toward the door, as if afraid my father might catch her in this small act of mercy. I took the money more out of shock than gratitude. It would not last long, but it was better than nothing. Sophie came to pick me up in her old Honda Civic, her face tight with worry. As we pulled away from the only home I had ever known, I did not cry. The numbness was a blessing, protecting me from the full impact of what had just happened. You can stay with us until we figure something out, Sophie said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. But I knew her generosity had limits. Her parents, while kind, would not want a pregnant teenager living in their home indefinitely. I had 24 hours to leave my home. I now had perhaps a week to find a new one. Sophie's parents welcomed me with awkward smiles and concerned glances. They made up the sofa bed in their basement and assured me I could stay for a little while. I felt the unspoken limitations in their kindness, saw the way they exchanged worried looks when they thought I was not watching. I did not blame them. Taking in a pregnant teenager was not part of their life plan. At night, I would hear them arguing in hushed tones about my presence in their home. We cannot just throw her out on the street, Sophie's mother would insist. I know that her father would reply, but this is not a permanent solution. What about when the baby comes? We cannot support another family. I knew I needed to find another option quickly. The local pregnancy resource center provided a list of shelters, and I found one called New Beginnings in Rochester, about 60 miles away. They had a program specifically for pregnant teens and young mothers, offering housing and support services. Leaving Prairie Hills meant leaving the only world I knew, but staying would mean constant reminders of my family's rejection. The decision was painful but necessary. The morning I left, Sophie's mother drove me to the bus station. She pressed an extra $50 into my hand and hugged me awkwardly. Take care of yourself, she said, and call Sophie sometimes. She will worry. The shelter was located in a converted Victorian house painted a cheerful yellow. Inside, the furnishings were worn but clean, and the staff greeted me with a warmth I desperately needed. My room was tiny, just large enough for a twin bed and a small dresser, but it was mine. I shared a bathroom with 3 other girls, all in similar situations. One of the requirements of staying at New Beginnings was either attending school or working. Since I was already several weeks behind in school and showing no signs of returning to Prairie Hills, I decided to pursue my GED instead. The shelter provided tutoring 3 times a week, and I threw myself into studying, grateful for the distraction from my circumstances. Finding work proved more challenging. Many businesses were reluctant to hire a visibly pregnant teenager with no experience. After 2 weeks of rejections, I finally found a position at Sweet Dreams Bakery, where the owner, Lucinda, took one look at my swollen eyes and desperate expression and offered me a job on the spot. I was in your shoes once, she confided after my first shift. Different time, same story. Sometimes all you need is one person to give you a chance. The work was physically demanding. I spent hours on my feet kneading dough and decorating pastries. By the end of each shift, my back ached and my ankles were swollen, but the paycheck was worth it. I was saving every penny, knowing that soon I would have a baby depending on me. Throughout this time, I tried repeatedly to contact Jason. His initial silence had evolved into active avoidance. When I finally cornered him during a visit back to Prairie Hills to collect some remaining belongings from Sophie, his response crushed my last hopes. "How do I even know it is mine?" he asked, not meeting my eyes. "Maybe you should talk to the shelter about adoption. That would be best for everyone." I stood in stunned silence, unable to comprehend how the boy who had whispered "I love you" under the stars could now suggest I give away our child. He mumbled something about his parents threatening to cancel his college fund, about how a baby would ruin both our futures, and then he walked away, leaving me alone on the street corner. That night, I wrote a letter to my parents, not asking for forgiveness or help, just informing them about their grandchild, thinking perhaps the reality of a baby might soften their hearts. I included my address at the shelter and a copy of my first ultrasound picture. I never received a response. As my pregnancy progressed, the stress began taking a physical toll. My blood pressure rose, and the doctor at the free clinic looked increasingly concerned during my monthly checkups. I was not gaining enough weight, working too many hours, sleeping too little. "You need to rest more," she advised during my 6th month. "This level of stress is not good for you or the baby." But rest was a luxury I could not afford. The shelter only allowed residents to stay for 6 months, meaning I would need to find my own housing shortly after giving birth. Every extra shift at the bakery was necessary for survival. The pain started in the middle of the night during my 7th month. Sharp cramps that woke me from a fitful sleep, followed by a warm gush of fluid. I called out for help, and one of the shelter staff rushed me to the emergency room. The next few hours passed in a blur of medical terms and sympathetic faces: placental abruption, fetal distress, emergency procedures, and finally the devastating news that my baby, a little girl, had not survived. I lay in the hospital bed afterward, empty in every sense of the word. The physical pain was nothing compared to the hollow ache in my chest. I had lost everything: my family, my boyfriend, my home, and now my baby. The one person I had been fighting for was gone. The hospital's social worker came to see me the next day, offering grief counseling and practical advice about next steps. She spoke gently about funeral arrangements, but I had no money for a proper burial. In the end, the hospital took care of the arrangements, and I was given a small box containing a certificate with tiny footprints and a hospital bracelet that never circled my daughter's wrist. After being discharged, I returned to the shelter in a fog of grief. The staff tried their best to support me, but their resources were limited. The room that had been prepared for a mother and child now felt like a mausoleum. I wrote one more letter to my parents, telling them about the loss of their grandchild. I did not expect a response, but some part of me hoped that shared grief might bridge the chasm between us. The letter was returned unopened, marked addressee unknown. They had moved without telling me. The finality of that rejection broke something inside me. I had been holding on to a sliver of hope that reconciliation might be possible someday, that my parents might eventually forgive me and welcome me back. The returned letter extinguished that hope completely. 2 weeks after losing the baby, I quit my job at the bakery and bought a one-way bus ticket to Los Angeles. I could not stay in Minnesota, surrounded by reminders of all I had lost. With just over $1,000 saved and a heart full of grief, I headed west to begin again. The night before I left, I sat with Sophie on the steps of the shelter, both of us crying softly. "How will I know if you are okay?" she asked, clutching my hand. "I will write," I promised. "Once I get settled, I will send you my address." "You are the strongest person I know," she said fiercely. "You are going to be amazing out there." I did not feel strong. I felt broken and terrified. But I knew staying would break me completely. As the bus pulled away the next morning, I pressed my forehead against the window and whispered goodbye to the life that might have been, to the daughter I would never know, and to the girl I had once been. The Los Angeles Greyhound station was a shock to my small-town senses. People rushed past in a blur of unfamiliar faces, languages, and clothing styles. I clutched my suitcase tightly, overwhelmed by the noise and movement, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake. With no plan beyond start over, I found myself in a cheap motel on Sunset Boulevard, paying by the week and watching my savings dwindle alarmingly. The neighborhood was nothing like the California of television shows with their palm trees and pristine beaches. This was gritty and noisy, with sirens blaring at all hours and suspicious characters lingering on street corners. Job hunting proved frustrating. My resume consisted of a few months at a bakery and an incomplete high school education. After a week of rejections, I was becoming desperate when I spotted a help wanted sign in the window of a cafe called West Side Coffee House, just a few blocks from my motel. The manager, Amanda Cruz, was a woman in her early 30s with bright purple streaks in her dark hair and more tattoos than I had ever seen on a single person. She looked at my pathetic resume and then studied my face. "You are running from something," she said bluntly. "I do not need to know what, but I need to know if you are reliable and willing to work hard." "I am," I assured her, fighting back tears of relief when she offered me a position as a barista starting the next day. The job paid minimum wage plus tips, barely enough to cover my motel room and basic necessities, but Amanda proved to be more than just an employer. She noticed when I skipped lunch breaks to save money and started bringing extra food accidentally. "Cannot let this go to waste," she would say, sliding a sandwich across the counter. "Just throw it out if you do not want it." I always ate it, swallowing my pride along with the food. One evening, after a particularly long shift, Amanda invited me to sit with her while she closed the books. "Where are you staying?" she asked casually. When I mentioned the motel, she frowned. "That place is a dump, and they charge tourist prices. I have a spare room in my apartment. The rent would be less than that motel, and it is actually clean. You could save some money." I was hesitant to accept such generosity from someone I barely knew, but a visit to her cozy 2-bedroom apartment in Culver City convinced me. The spare room was small but bright, with a real bed instead of the lumpy motel mattress I had been sleeping on. I moved in the next day. Living with Amanda changed everything. She became not just a roommate, but a mentor and friend. She introduced me to people, showed me around the city, and most importantly, encouraged me to think about my future. "You are smart," she would say. "You should finish your education." With her encouragement, I enrolled in GED preparation classes at the local community center. 3 nights a week after my shifts at the cafe, I would study for hours, determined to complete the education that had been interrupted. The day I received my GED certificate, Amanda threw a small celebration at the apartment, inviting a few of her friends and coworkers from the cafe. "First step done," she said, raising a glass of sparkling cider in my honor. "Now what is next?" "I do not know," I admitted. "Maybe some college courses." Amanda did more than encourage. She researched community colleges in the area, helped me apply for financial aid, and even drove me to the campus for my placement tests. By the fall, 2 years after arriving in Los Angeles, I was enrolled as a part-time student at Santa Monica College, still working full-time at the cafe. College opened a world of possibilities I had never considered. My first semester, I took a variety of courses trying to determine what interested me. It was in an introductory law class that I found my calling. The professor, Thomas Garcia, noticed my passionate participation in discussions about family law and child advocacy. After class one day, he asked about my interest in the subject. Before I knew it, I was telling him my story, the pregnancy, the rejection, the loss, and my struggle to rebuild. "Your experience could make you a powerful advocate," he said thoughtfully. "The system needs people who understand what it is like to fall through the cracks." With Professor Garcia's mentorship, I focused my studies on political science and pre-law courses. He helped me apply for scholarships and introduced me to colleagues who could advise me on law school applications. "You have overcome more at 20 than most people face in a lifetime," he wrote in one of my recommendation letters. "That resilience will serve you well in the legal field." 4 years after receiving my GED, I was accepted to UCLA School of Law with a partial scholarship. The achievement was bittersweet. I wished my parents could see that their disgraced daughter had not only survived but thrived. I wished they could be proud of me. Law school was the most challenging experience of my life. The workload was enormous, the competition fierce, and the pressure constant. I continued working part-time at the cafe now as an assistant manager thanks to Amanda's support while maintaining a grueling academic schedule. There were nights I cried from exhaustion, questioning whether I could continue. On those nights, I would take out the small box from the hospital containing my daughter's footprints. I had named her Lily, though she never took a breath outside my body. I would trace those tiny footprints and remember why I was pushing myself so hard. "This is for you," I would whisper. So what happened to us never happens to another mother and child. My focus on family law and child advocacy led to an internship with the Children's Rights Coalition during my second year. The organization provided legal assistance to families in crisis, particularly teenage parents fighting for custody rights or access to education. Working directly with young mothers reminded me painfully of my own experience, but it also affirmed my path. I could not change my past, but I could use it to help others navigate similar challenges. Upon graduating from law school, I received multiple job offers from prestigious firms. The salaries were tempting, especially after years of financial struggle. But I chose instead to accept a position with the Los Angeles County Public Defender's Office, specifically in their Family and Juvenile Division. The work was demanding and often heartbreaking, but deeply fulfilling. I represented children in foster care, teenage parents fighting for custody, and families torn apart by poverty and circumstance. My colleagues were impressed by my dedication, unaware that each case was in some way an opportunity to heal my own wounds. 5 years into my legal career, I had saved enough to buy a small condo in Culver City, not far from where Amanda and I had lived during my early years in Los Angeles. She had since married and moved to San Diego, but we remained close, talking weekly and visiting when possible. On the 10th anniversary of my daughter's death, I established the Lily Thompson Foundation, a nonprofit organization providing legal support, housing assistance, and educational opportunities for pregnant and parenting teens. What began as a small operation run from my living room evenings and weekends eventually grew into a respected organization with multiple staff members and a dedicated office space. Through the foundation, I connected with Sophie again. She had found me through the organization's website and reached out, excited to learn that I had built such a meaningful life. We rekindled our friendship, and she eventually joined the foundation's board of directors, bringing her experience as a social worker to our mission. My personal life took longer to rebuild. Trust did not come easily after the betrayals I had experienced. I dated occasionally but kept people at a distance, afraid of being abandoned again. It took years of therapy and self-reflection to recognize this pattern and begin to change it. By my 35th birthday, I had created a life I was proud of. The foundation was thriving, helping dozens of young parents annually. My legal career had evolved to include teaching positions at local law schools where I shared my expertise in family law and juvenile justice. I had a small circle of close friends who had become my chosen family, and a modest but comfortable home filled with books and plants and evidence of a life well lived. I had not heard from my parents in all those years. Occasionally, I would search their names online, discovering that they had remained in Minnesota but moved to a different town. My father had retired from his position as principal, and my mother still directed the church choir. Their lives had continued without me, as mine had without them. I had made peace with their absence, or so I thought, until the day the phone call came that would force me to confront the past I had worked so hard to overcome. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my office at the foundation reviewing grant applications when my assistant transferred the call. "Miss Thompson, this is Richard Bennett from Bennett Legal Services. I am calling regarding a legal matter involving Gerald and Martha Thompson." My heart stuttered at the mention of my parents' names. For a moment, I could not speak, transported back to the terrified 17-year-old girl I had once been. "Miss Thompson, are you there?" "Yes," I managed. "What is this regarding?" "I have been retained by your parents to represent them in a grandparent visitation case. They wish to establish legal visitation rights with their grandchild." The words made no sense. I had no child. Lily had died 22 years ago. "There must be some mistake," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I do not have any children." There was a pause on the line. "According to my clients, you gave birth to a child in 2003, a child they have never been allowed to meet." The realization hit me with physical force. They did not know. After all these years, my parents believed I had given birth to a healthy baby and kept their grandchild from them. Mr. Bennett, I think you and your clients are operating under a misunderstanding. I was pregnant in 2003, yes, but I lost the baby in my 7th month. There is no child. Another pause longer this time. I see. My clients were not aware of this information. However, they have expressed skepticism about this claim given the circumstances of your departure from their home. Anger flared within me. Are you suggesting I am lying about the death of my child? Not at all, Miss Thompson. But my clients have requested verification of this information before proceeding further. Verification. You want medical records proving that my baby died. Do you have any idea how traumatic this request is? I understand this is difficult, Bennett said, his professional tone never wavering. But from my client's perspective, they have reason to believe their grandchild exists and is being kept from them. They are prepared to pursue legal action to establish visitation rights. The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Bennett explaining that my parents had filed a petition in family court claiming grandparent rights under Minnesota state law. Despite having no relationship with me for over 2 decades, they were now demanding access to a child who had never drawn breath. After ending the call, I sat at my desk, trembling with a mixture of grief and rage. How dare they? After abandoning me when I needed them most, after returning my letters unopened, they now wanted to force their way back into my life through legal means. I called David Wilson, a colleague who specialized in family law cases involving grandparent rights. We had worked together on several foundation cases and had developed a mutual respect. This is unusual, David said after I explained the situation. Grandparent visitation rights typically apply when there is an existing relationship between grandparent and child or when one parent has died or been declared unfit. Neither applies in your case, obviously, since there is no child. So what are they hoping to accomplish? Hard to say without knowing their motivation. Have you had any contact with your parents recently? Anything that might explain why they are pursuing this now after all this time? I shook my head, then remembered we were on the phone. Nothing. The last communication was 22 years ago when they returned my letter unopened. David was silent for a moment. There is something else to consider, Eugenia. How did they find you? How did they know where you live, where you work? The question sent a chill through me. I had changed my name professionally after law school, using my middle name James as my surname to create distance from my past. The foundation was registered under E.J. Thompson, and I had been careful to keep my personal information private. I do not know, I admitted. It might be worth investigating. Someone has been gathering information about you, and that concerns me from both a legal and personal safety perspective. David agreed to represent me and immediately filed a motion to dismiss the case based on the simple fact that there was no child. He also requested copies of all evidence my parents had submitted with their petition. What we received was shocking. My parents had hired a private investigator who had been tracking me for months. The file contained photographs of me entering and leaving my condo, my office, even meeting friends for dinner. There were copies of foundation newsletters, articles I had written for legal journals, and even credit reports. Most disturbing was a statement from a former neighbor in my apartment building who claimed to have heard a child's voice coming from my unit on multiple occasions. The statement was vague and clearly mistaken, possibly referring to a friend's child who sometimes visited, but it had been enough to convince my parents that their grandchild existed. David was concerned about the invasive nature of the investigation. This goes beyond a simple grandparent rights case. The level of surveillance is troubling. As we prepared our response to the court, more information emerged. My parents had suffered financial setbacks in recent years. My father's retirement fund had been heavily impacted by market downturns, and my mother had experienced health issues requiring expensive treatments not fully covered by insurance. Meanwhile, public records showed that the Lily Thompson Foundation had recently received a substantial grant, and a profile of me in a legal journal had mentioned my rising star status in family law. The timing suggested that my parents' sudden interest in reconnecting might be motivated by more than familial love. They want money, I said flatly during a meeting with David. They have heard I am successful, and now they want back into my life. We cannot prove that, David cautioned. and accusing them of financial motives would not look good in court. So what do? We stick to the facts. There is no child, therefore no basis for a grandparent visitation case. We provide the medical records, however painful that may be, and ask for the case to be dismissed. The court date was set for the following month. As it approached, I found myself increasingly anxious. After 2 decades of building a new life, I would be forced to face the people who had cast me out at my most vulnerable moment. David suggested a meeting before the court date, a chance to clear up the misunderstanding and potentially avoid a painful public confrontation. Despite my reservations, I agreed. It was time to face my past directly. I chose to have the meeting at my home. It was a deliberate decision, a way of controlling the environment and showing my parents what I had built without them. David advised against it, concerned about the personal intrusion, but I needed them to see the reality of my life, not their imagined version. My condo was not large or luxurious, but it was mine, paid for with years of hard work. I prepared meticulously for their arrival, cleaning surfaces that were already clean, arranging and rearranging flowers, playing out scenarios in my mind. They arrived exactly on time, a trait my father had always insisted upon. The doorbell rang at 3 o'clock sharp, and I took a deep breath before opening the door. The years had changed them as they had changed me. My father's once dark hair was now completely white, his imposing height diminished by a slight stoop. My mother looked frailer than I remembered, her face lined and her hands spotted with age. They were in their late 60s now, looking every year and more. We stood frozen for a moment, these strangers who had once been the center of my world, taking in the sight of each other across the chasm of 22 years. Eugenia, my mother finally said, her voice wavering. She moved as if to embrace me, but I stepped back, maintaining the distance between us. "Come in," I said, gesturing toward the living room where I had arranged seating and a tray with coffee and store-bought cookies. I had not baked for them. Baking was something you did for people you loved. They entered cautiously, taking in the bookshelves lined with legal texts, the framed degrees on the wall, the photographs of me with friends and colleagues. No family photos, no evidence of a child. We sat awkwardly, my parents perched on the edge of the sofa while I took the armchair opposite them. David had offered to be present, but I had declined. This confrontation needed to happen without witnesses. "You have a lovely home," my mother offered, breaking the silence. "Thank you," I replied, not elaborating. Let them work for this conversation, I thought. My father cleared his throat. "We should get to the point of our visit. We understand you have been served with legal papers regarding visitation rights." "Yes, regarding visitation rights for a child that does not exist." My mother's expression crumpled. "Please do not lie to us, Eugenia. We know you had the baby. We just want to meet our grandchild." "What child?" I asked, echoing the words from the text message thumb. "What exactly are you looking for here?" My father leaned forward, his expression stern, so familiar it made my stomach clench. "We have information that you gave birth to our grandchild. A private investigator confirmed it. We just want what any grandparents would want, the chance to know our grandchild." I stood and walked to a small cabinet, removing a folder I had prepared. I returned to my seat and placed it on the coffee table between us. "These are my medical records from April 2003, I said quietly. "They document the emergency delivery and death of my daughter at 7 months gestation due to placental abruption, likely caused by stress and poor prenatal care. There was no child. She never took a breath outside my body." My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. My father frowned, picking up the folder and scanning the documents inside. "This could be fabricated," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "The hospital can verify the records," I replied coldly, "as can the cemetery where her ashes are interred. I had no money for a proper burial, so she was cremated as part of the hospital's service for stillborn infants. I have visited the memorial garden every year on her birthday." The silence that followed was heavy with 2 decades of misunderstanding and pain. My mother began to cry softly while my father continued to review the documents, his expression unreadable. "If this is true," he finally said, "why did not you tell us?" The question was so absurd, so divorced from reality, that I laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "I did tell you. I wrote to you after it happened. The letter was returned unopened, marked addressee unknown. You had moved without telling me where. Before that, you had made it abundantly clear that I was no longer your daughter. We were angry, my father admitted. We felt betrayed by your choices. But we never stopped caring. Caring, I repeated incredulous. Is that what you call throwing your pregnant teenage daughter out with nothing but a few $100s? Is that what you call refusing all contact for 22 years? Because from where I am sitting, it looks a lot like abandonment. We made mistakes, my mother interjected, wiping her tears. We were wrong and we have regretted it every day since. Yet you never tried to find me until now. What changed? Why the sudden interest in my life and in a grandchild you thought existed? They exchanged glances and I saw the hesitation in their eyes. The truth, I insisted. After 22 years, I deserve at least that. My father sighed deeply. We have had some financial difficulties. My retirement fund was heavily invested in stocks that underperformed. Your mother needed surgery last year that insurance did not fully cover. We saw an article about your foundation receiving a major grant, and we thought perhaps there could be reconciliation that might benefit everyone. You thought I would give you money, I translated flatly. Not just that, my mother said quickly. We genuinely wanted to reconnect, to make amends. By having me investigated, by filing a frivolous lawsuit, by invading my privacy, and demanding access to a child who never existed. Those are strange ways to make amends. The conversation deteriorated further from there. My father became defensive, suggesting that my irresponsibility had likely contributed to the loss of the baby. My mother vacillated between tearful apologies and subtle guilt trips about how they had suffered from my absence in their lives. I listened to it all with a growing sense of clarity. These people were not my family. Biology had connected us once, but they had severed that connection with their actions. The parents I remembered flawed as they were no longer existed. These strangers wearing their faces were not people I wanted in my life. I think you should leave, I said, finally interrupting my father's lecture about forgiveness being a two-way street. There is no grandchild, there is no relationship to rebuild, and there will be no financial support. Eugenia, please, my mother began, but I held up my hand. I lost everything because of you. My home, my education, my support system, and ultimately my child. I rebuilt my life piece by piece alone. I do not owe you a place in that life now that it suits your needs. My father stood, his face flushed with anger. You always were stubborn. Some things never change. Some things do change, I countered. I'm no longer the frightened girl you could intimidate. I am a lawyer who specializes in protecting vulnerable families. If you pursue this lawsuit, I will countersue for harassment and invasion of privacy. I have documented every step of your investigation into my life, and I do not think a judge will look kindly on your methods. They left shortly after, my mother still crying, my father tight-lipped and rigid with anger. As I closed the door behind them, I felt a strange mixture of emotions, grief for what could have been relief that the confrontation was over, and an unexpected sense of empowerment. They had held power over me for so long, first as authority figures in my childhood, then as the architects of my abandonment, and finally as specters of rejection haunting my adult life. By facing them directly, by speaking my truth without flinching, I had reclaimed that power. The court date arrived 2 weeks later. My parents did not withdraw their petition despite our meeting forcing me to present the medical records documenting my daughter's death in open court. It was a final cruelty, making me relive that trauma publicly, but I endured it with the same resilience that had carried me through the past 22 years. The judge dismissed the case, immediately expressing sympathy for my loss and thinly veiled disapproval of my parents' tactics. As we left the courtroom, my mother attempted to approach me, but David stepped between us, guiding me toward the exit. It is over, he said quietly. They cannot hurt you anymore. But as I walked away, I knew it was not entirely true. They could not hurt me the way they once had, but the pain of their rejection would always be part of me, a scar that had healed but never disappeared completely. The courthouse steps were crowded with people coming and going, their lives intersecting briefly before continuing on separate paths. I stood for a moment, watching the flow of humanity, thinking about how our lives touch others in ways we cannot always predict or understand. David had gone to file some final paperwork, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I was surprised to see my mother approaching, having separated from my father, who stood by their car in the parking lot, watching with a scowl. "Eugenia," she called, slightly breathless from hurrying. "Please, just 1 minute." I could have walked away. Part of me wanted to. But another part, the part that had once been a daughter longing for her mother's approval, kept me rooted to the spot. "What is it?" I asked, not unkindly but with clear boundaries in my voice. "I am sorry," she said simply. "Not just for this lawsuit, but for everything. For not standing up to your father 22 years ago. For not being the mother you deserved." The apology was unexpected, and I did not know how to respond. It was both too little and too late, yet I could see the genuine regret in her eyes. "Thank you for saying that," I finally managed. "But it does not change what happened." "I know." She twisted her wedding ring nervously. "I just wanted you to know that I have thought of you every day. I kept track of your birthday every year. She hesitated. "I saved things for you. News clippings when you were mentioned in the paper cards I bought but never sent." The revelation pierced something in me. The idea of my mother secretly tracking my life, keeping mementos she could not share, was both touching and tragic. It spoke of regret held close for decades of roads not taken and words not spoken. "I wish things had been different," she said softly. "I wish I had been stronger." "So do I replied honestly. She reached into her purse and withdrew a small envelope, holding it out to me. "This is my contact information. If you ever want to talk or just to know more about the health history for medical reasons, I would understand if you threw it away, but I wanted you to have it." I took the envelope, not promising anything, but not refusing the small olive branch either. We both knew it was unlikely I would ever call, but the gesture itself was a kind of closure. "Goodbye, Mother," I said, using the formal term, deliberately acknowledging our biological connection while maintaining emotional distance. "Goodbye, Eugenia," she replied, her voice breaking slightly. "You became an extraordinary woman. I wish I could take credit, but I know we had nothing to do with it." She returned to my father, and they drove away out of my life once more, but this time by my choice rather than theirs. In the weeks that followed, I found myself reflecting deeply on the concept of family. The people who share our blood are not always the ones who share our lives. The foundation I had built, dedicated to my lost daughter, had become my legacy and my purpose. The friends who had supported me through the years had become my chosen family. I decided to expand the Foundation's mission, creating a specific program for reconciliation and healing between estranged family members when appropriate, and supporting those who needed to maintain boundaries for their own well-being. Not everyone can or should reconnect with family members who have caused harm, but for those who wanted to try, we would provide mediation and counseling services. 6 months after the court case, I received a formal letter from my father. Unlike my mother's emotional approach, his was practical. He and my mother were facing foreclosure on their home due to medical debts. He was not asking directly for help, but the implication was clear. I considered ignoring it entirely, as they had ignored my letters years ago. It would have been justified. But I found I did not want to perpetuate the cycle of hurt, even if they deserved it. Instead, I arranged for the Foundation to anonymously pay off a portion of their medical debt as part of our community support program. Not enough to solve all their problems, but enough to give them breathing room. They would never know it came from me, and I preferred it that way. It was not done for gratitude or reconciliation, but because helping people in crisis was the work I had chosen regardless of who they were. The experience with my parents reinforced my commitment to the Foundation's work. I began speaking at high schools about teen pregnancy and family support, sharing my story in the hope that other young people might avoid similar pain. I started writing a memoir not just as personal therapy, but as a resource for others navigating family rejection and rebuilding. On what would have been Lily's 23rd birthday, I visited the memorial garden where her ashes were scattered. I had made this pilgrimage every year, but this time felt different. I sat on a bench among the flowers, thinking about how her brief existence, though marked by loss, had ultimately shaped my life in profound ways. Without my pregnancy, without being cast out, without losing her, I might never have found my calling. I might never have built a foundation that helped hundreds of young parents and their children. I might never have discovered my own strength and resilience. This realization did not erase the grief or justify my parents' cruelty. Nothing could do that. But it helped me understand that our deepest wounds sometimes lead to our greatest purpose if we have the courage to transform pain into action. As I left the garden, I felt a sense of peace I had not experienced before. The past would always be part of me, but it no longer defined me. I had built a life of meaning and purpose from the broken pieces of my dreams, and in doing so had honored the daughter I never knew. The child I lost might never have taken a breath in this world, but through my work I had become a mother in a different way, a guardian and advocate for countless young people navigating their own difficult paths. Perhaps that was Lily's gift to me, the chance to channel my loss into love for others who needed it most. Have you ever had to rebuild your life after a profound loss or rejection? I would love to hear about your journey in the comments below. Sometimes sharing our stories helps others feel less alone in their struggles. If this story touched you in any way, please give it a like and subscribe to hear more real-life experiences. And remember, family is not always about blood. Sometimes it is about who stands by you when everyone else walks away. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it brings some comfort to anyone going through their own difficult times.